Welcome to Reimagining Miami Gardens. In this groundbreaking podcast dissertation, we examine the profound impact of leadership on government with a specific focus on how it shapes the city of Miami Gardens. Through insightful interviews, in-depth analysis, and compelling narratives, we uncover the intricate dynamics between leadership and governance, highlighting the transformative power of effective leadership in shaping the trajectory of a city. Join us on this enlightening journey as we explore the role of leadership in driving positive change and development in the now vibrant community of Miami Gardens.
Welcome to Reimagining Miami Gardens podcast. I'm Oliver Gilbert, the chairman of the Miami-Dade County Board of County Commissioners and the former mayor of then the very young and vibrant city of Miami Gardens. I'm excited to dive into the complexities of leadership in driving positive change in cities today. Today, we embark on a journey to explore the challenges and opportunities faced by newly formed cities, such as Miami Gardens, in their quest for transformation. In our study, we aim to address the pressing issues that hinder city progress, from bureaucratic obstacles to limited resources, and the critical role that leadership plays in overcoming these challenges. The purpose of our research and the discussions on this podcast is to uncover the strategies employed by city leaders to drive successful city transformation initiatives and provide insights into the essential elements of effective leadership in urban development. Join me as we navigate through the intricacies of city management through policy and administration, examine the importance of collaboration and strategic decision-making, and uncover the valuable lessons learned from successful city transformation initiatives. Together, let's explore transformative power of leadership in shaping the future of our cities. Now, joining me here today is Theresa, the former city manager and current COO, former city manager, and I skipped over this, of the wonderful city of North Miami, and the current COO, Chief Operating Officer, for the Board of County Commissioners. She'll be facilitating the conversation of how I started my career and allowing all of you to just get a glimpse in who I am and how I became that person. Theresa.
Chairman Gilbert, thank you so much for having me. Let's get right in. You have come a long way from a kid who grew up in Miami Gardens. So can you tell us just a little bit about your childhood and upbringing?
I mean, you can't really talk about my childhood and upbringing without talking about my parents. And so my mom, she passed away recently. She was a Seventh-day Adventist teacher. And so it was interesting because she taught biology and science and mathematics, and I'm not good in any of those things. And she later went on to be a librarian and a media specialist. And so it was my love for reading. I think that's where she would take me to the school with her in the summer times. And even after school, I had to go meet her sometimes. And I would have to sit in the library, and I could just sit and find me a corner, and I would just read when I was younger. And so I became a very, very aggressive reader. I read, and reading comprehension, my scores were always like through the roof. And so that's a part of my personality and my character. But I'm not complete without talking about my dad, who was a Baptist preacher. And so I got this Seventh-day Adventist teacher and this Baptist preacher, and I'm going to church every Saturday and every Sunday. And I have this mixture of someone who believes in process and science and numbers, and this man who everything about him just speaks to faith. And so now I think when people hear me speak about the community and the things that we can accomplish and how I go about solving problems, you can see kind of reflections of both of their influence. Like how I sit down and say, what do the numbers generate? What do they dictate? What do we do? What does it say we need to do? What does it say? Don't tell me what you feel. Tell me what the numbers reflect. On one hand, but on the other hand, talking to the folks in the public about what we can actually accomplish if we have faith and we work. I say all the time that, faith is great, but faith without work is dead. That's in the Bible. So we actually put out the work. We have the faith. We touch, agree. We move forward. And all of those efforts are driven by the process. But that comes from my mom and my dad. That comes from a Seventh-day Adventist teacher and a Southern Baptist preacher. That comes from her emphasizing process and data, and him emphasizing faith and community. Those things coming together is kind of, that's how you get That's how you get a lawyer, I guess. That's how you get a lawyer who becomes mayor, becomes chairman of the county commission, who believes that we can actually become transformative by analyzing things, but also setting goals that have at their core helping people, listening to people, understanding, what they're saying, and not just what they're saying, but what they're meaning. Because when I had to go places with my dad, a lot of times when he was counseling people, it wasn't what they said. He didn't just have to listen to the words. He had to try to divine what they meant. Not just because they couldn't, and this happens in community a lot now. People can't necessarily express exactly what they want. A good example is like traffic. They'll say, oh, we don't want to sit in traffic. They can't tell you they want rapid mass transit. They can't tell you where the line should be. People say we don't want to pay such high costs for housing. They can't talk to you about supply and demand and density. But they just know what they want. You have to not listen to what they're saying and be able to back out of that, apply data, and figure out how you actually address that. And that's going to be almost in every issue, from housing to public safety to rapid mass transit to resiliency. They know the goal they want, but not necessarily how to get there. You can listen with his ears and solve the problem with her mind. And those are my parents. That's my upbringing.
That's amazing. Let's talk about, can you think of someone outside of your parents that influenced you tremendously growing up?
Outside my parents, I guess there are a couple of people, right? And so I know and there are adults who influence me. My football coach, Coach John Osborne, he used to make me like push these sleds like relentlessly in the summer. We'd do 2-a-days, and we'd have to hit the sled and push it. But you push until your legs fell off. And sometimes he'd make us push a wall. And I played offensive lineman, and he said, get down and push the wall. And we have to fire off and hit the wall and just drive. And he said, you're going to push this wall until the wall moves. And we were dumb. We were kids. The wall never moved. The wall never moved. But you know what? The wall never moved, but we never stopped trying to push. And in me, I take lessons of not ever giving up. The wall didn't have to move. I'm just going to keep pushing it till this whistle blew. I'm going to keep fighting. You're not going to. This wall will not beat me. And so I think of people like that. I think of people like my sister. My older sister, she was only 2 years older than me, but she from her I get like diversity in the type of music that I like and the type of books that I would read. So she was a rebel of some sort. She would listen to music. It was a very religious family. She listened to music like Duran Duran and Cyndi Lauper and all those folks. And so I would get to listen to that music with her. And it was interesting because it was different than anything else I was being exposed to. But and the books that she would read, she would steal those little books and read the Harlequin romance books. And my mom hated those books. She literally hated those books. She called it trash on paper, which I always thought was funny because most trash is paper. But so I thought that was interesting. But I never said that because I would have gotten a spanking. But so I didn't like say anything. But I thought it was interesting. So, but from that, the different types of inputs that I would get. And so now when you hear me speaking, even you look at my title playlist, there's all different types of music on there. And so that diversity of how I bring in information, I'm not going to just be one thing. I'm not just going to be someone who is a product of an urban environment who just listens to hip hop. I love hip hop. But I also listen to a lot of gospel music. I listen to classical music. I listen to soft rock. I listen to heavy rock. I listen to literally every type of music. It's important because those are the ways that we form the ability, the connectors to other people in the community. So you don't necessarily think about it, but those cultural connections give you the ability to talk to people from anywhere. And so I was picking that up from people like my older sister who went to Miramar High School and at the time, and from people who she picked it up from. And so I think when I look back, I think about people like that, and they've been incredibly influential in who I've become.
Let's talk about your schooling and your educational background. Let's start with high school. Where'd you go to high school? I mean, I kind of know, but
I went to Miami-Dade Senior High School. I'm a Viking. And so Norland, great school. I played football out there. It wasn't the best football school I was there, but we had an extraordinary academic class. And it was at a time in Miami-Dade County where we had an influx of folks who came from Jamaica, and they were actually all going to Northern. And so it allowed another, glimpse into a window of diversity, being able to interact with people who didn't necessarily have the same upbringing as you. And it was that time when there was African Americans, there were some white Americans, and then the influx of Jamaican Americans all in this one spot, and us finding a way to actually have a good community. Finding a way to have a good community within that school and get along. And we did, and we had fun. And I look back, listen, like the people I went to high school with, my best friends from high school, Tia Wanton, she was the homecoming queen, and Roosevelt Delaveau. He played left tackle and I played left guard. They're the godparents to my son. So they're my son's godparents. And so they're still in my life. I've talked to them both this week. And those type of friendships kind of anchored me to the community. There's never, when people say you don't, some people forget where they come from. I don't have an opportunity to. First of all, I still live here. And secondly, I still talk to all the same people. And so I didn't believe my life wasn't about replacing people. It was about adding people. It wasn't about replacing relationships. It was about adding relationships and having that ability to actually add relationships and add their perspectives to what my worldview, so I could always hear not just from my perspective, from other folks' perspective.
You just went to the picnic though too, right?
I did just go to the picnic, and we had fun. It was a lot of red cups out there. And if you all are listening and you know what red cups are synonymous for being on public parks. Everything in a red cup is actually technically alcohol, just so you know. So yeah, you didn't really know that, but yeah, no, it's really technically alcohol. So there were a lot of red cups out there. None of you knew that. Wow. You knew that.
I might have known that.
Yeah, she knew that. She knew that. Yeah. It was definitely a lot of red cups out there.
All right, so we come out of Norland Senior High, and what's your decision in terms of going to school?
So I was going to go to the University of Florida. I'd been accepted to the University of Florida, and I was going. I was going to be a Gator. It is what it is. They told me it was the best school in Florida. I applied. They accepted me. So I was like, I'm going. Roosevelt was going to play football for FAMU, and he wanted to go see the school. And his mom was older, and she couldn't take him up there. And so my family owned some property right outside of Tallahassee in Monticello, Florida. My grandma had a ranch up there. And so we said, we'll take you. And so we all got in the car. And we drove up to FAMU. We drove to FAMU. We stayed at my grandma's house in the house there. And we went over to the campus. And I went over to the campus, and I hadn't even applied to FAMU. But Tia, she was one of my best friends, and Roosevelt, other best friend, they were both going to FAMU. I was going to the University of Florida. It would be really for the first time in a long time, I would be completely alone. I didn't know anyone else was going there. So I go to FAMU and I visit, and I'm walking through and I see all these people, and it was a summer class that was in session, and I got to sit in and listen, and these young people, these students, they sounded so smart, and it was the first time that I'd seen professors who looked like me and students who looked like me, and they sounded so incredibly intelligent. I loved the conversation. And so I come out, and my mom and them, they're sitting out there. My dad, I remember him. He used to wear his pants all the way up with the belt like preachers do, and a hat that said, "I love Jesus." He was always easy to find in any crowd. Yeah, because he's the guy with the hat that said, "I love Jesus." So yeah, and I told him, I said, I want to come here. And so my mom looked at me. She had gone to a little school like Barber Scotia College. It was a little HBCU. It was like in the Carolinas or something. And she said, you want to come here, but you're set to go to the University of Florida. We've already, sent them the dormitory fees and everything. And I said, okay, so I'm going to come here. And she said, okay, well, let's go to the admissions office and let's see if it's too soon to apply. And she had been working for Miami-Dade Public Schools. And so she'd been there for a long time, so she knew people down in the system and everything. And we went, and I applied right there on the spot. I filled out the application. And, they had a little point for references. I said, references forthcoming. And she called down, and she had them fax up my information. And they actually accepted me before we left Tallahassee.
Oh, that's awesome.
And so I was then going to FAMU. We talked to the football program, and they told me, well, he had to stay in the dorms, and I hadn't actually applied for housing, but we're going to be roommates. And so they worked it out, and that was my roommate. And so I got for my freshman year, I got to be roommates with my best friend. And Tia, she was the only one of us who had a car. It was cool because she would always come by and pick us up, and we would go to the grocery store. And so I got to come to FAMU, a school that would become it would become seminal in my identity, an important part, because my mom would say that she sent a young man who would not speak to FAMU. She got back a man who would not shut up. So, it became very important in my identity and how I would advance and matriculate and how I would build confidence. And so it became important, but it happened just on that day because we were taking him to school.
All right, so I have to ask you, though, to kind of introduce FAMU the way that you normally introduce it. So you got to tell me the whole name.
Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University, located on the highest of 7 hills in Tallahassee, Florida. God created a word to describe FAMU. He called us incomparable. That's what he called us. That means there's nothing that you can compare to FAMU.
I love when you do that, so I had to make you do that this time. So you leave, you graduate from FAMU.
Yeah.
And what were your choices then? What were you thinking?
So FAMU was an interesting place because it allowed me to explore a lot of the diversity of my interests. So my major there was criminal justice. My minor was political science. And so, but I worked on a television show, Snake Eyes Television. I was an on-air personality, and then I became an executive producer. But I also worked in student government, the student senate. So I was a part of a poetry club. So there was all of this diversity of things that would okay, well, yeah, this kid is really strange. While I was there, I worked at Florida Student Association, and I become the executive director of the Florida Student Association for a time. That's the association that lobbies on behalf of students who are attending state university systems everywhere. So my job was to actually advocate for students of the SUS before the Florida legislature. We had possibly the worst session ever. They gave us the largest tuition increase ever while I was the executive director. And I was like, man, this is crazy. And so I'm listening to all these legislators, and they're all lawyers. They're all lawyers. And I think, and this is probably going to seem kind of impolitic, but some of them were complete idiots. And I'm thinking to myself, if they could graduate from law school, I know I can. If they can graduate from law school. So I was like, whatever. I'm going to take the LSAT. I take the LSAT. I do okay, not great. But my cousin is at St. Thomas University, and she's finishing. And she says, hey, you should talk to this professor who's out here, Professor Omar Salim. He is a good professor. He teaches criminal justice. You were a criminal justice major. He teaches criminal law. And so talk to him. And so I talked to him, and he says, well, you should apply. So I applied to St. Thomas University, and St. Thomas University accepts me to law school. And so I start my postgraduate studies at St. Thomas. And that's just how I got there, because I said, well, they're lawyers. Clearly, I can do this. And because my grades were okay, my LSAT was okay, and I got introduced to the right people at the right time. I come to St. Thomas University. I remember it was interesting. There was a professor. I didn't know much about law school. I didn't have anybody in my family that was necessarily lawyers in that way. At that time, Alexis hadn't graduated yet. And I heard these folks talking about students, talking about law review, and talking about, moot court. And so I didn't know what it was. And so I went to ask one of the deans. I said, what is this? And I remember her response. It was very telling. And I remember my response, which probably was very telling to her of who I was. I asked her, and she was like, you shouldn't worry about law review or moot court. Those are academic honors. Most of our black students fail out after the first semester or are on academic probation. And so I thought that was an amazing thing that she could say to a young student. And I said, well, it's my understanding that it's the bottom third of students that are on probation or fail out. She said, correct. I said, well, I've never been in the bottom third of anything in my life. I won't start with your law school. I made the dean's list. I made sure to remind her of that. And that is FAMU. Ultimate belief in yourself. Like, that's what I got from FAMU. Like, I don't know what those classes was going to entail, but if the question is whether I will be good enough, let me answer it now. I will be. I will be good enough. I'll be smart enough. I'll do the work. I will do the work. And that's what I got from FAMU. It wasn't one particular thing. It wasn't, hey, they made me really good at research or really good at writing. I'm okay in all of those things. What they made me realize is that I'm good enough for any situation. There's not a room big enough. There's not a stage too big. It's not a crowd that has too many people. There's not a concept convoluted enough. You can figure it out. You are more than sufficient in every instance. And that's the confidence that I get from going to FAMU. It brings me to St. Thomas. I go to St. Thomas. I do my first year there. I do really well. I apply to transfer to University of Miami. I get accepted. I graduate from University of Miami with honors.
Well, when you get, I'm like, I love it. I love that you are, one of the things that I'm getting is this core idea that I can lead, I can do it. Mm-hmm. And I love that it seems to come from, actually, it sounded like it was already there with you. Because when you talk about going to FAMU and making that decision that day to say, this is where I'm going, it was kind of you making that decision of leading where your future was going to be.
You know, one of the things I like to point out, and I mentioned this to someone yesterday, it's the difference between being shy and being introverted. I've never actually been shy. I've been always kind of introverted. So I would never actually say anything. So there were two people who would basically hear my voice in all of high school, Tia and Roosevelt. I talked to them all the time. And so they knew that I was relatively funny. Like I was funny and I was thoughtful and I was smart. They knew that, but most people in high school I went to high school with wouldn't know that because I just didn't talk a lot. FAMU gave me the ability, the opportunity, and encouragement to actually speak a lot. They say that kid who's been now, thoughtful and intelligent and trained to law school with the absence of apprehensions about speaking in front of people. I'm not afraid of that anymore. And so I think that's what my mom noticed that came back. The difference between someone, before she might have thought I was shy, I was never really shy. I was just quiet or introverted. When I came back, I wasn't that. And so I think that's what happens, and that's how I go into law school. And I think that allows me that absence of fear. Sometimes folks have fear, and you'll see it now. Because in our core, I think everyone has a little bit of imposter syndrome. They think that they may not belong. And so one of the things that I do when I talk to kids in schools now is I start by affirming that they're good enough, they're strong enough, they're smart enough. They belong. Get past that. That's you holding you back. That's you assigning something to yourself that limits your growth. I don't believe that I'm an imposter. I believe that I am actually good enough and belonging in every room and every table that I sit at.
Can you walk us through your career progression from kind of your first job to becoming where you are right now, the chairman of the Miami-Dade County Commission?
It's a time with that. Listen, so my first job, I can't tell the story of my first job without telling the story that I did not have a job. I didn't have a job. I was kind of hanging out at home. I had taken the bar exam. My parents weren't really pressuring me to get a job. My job was to answer all of the phones in our house every day. That was my first job. So my mom had a phone, one number. My dad had one number because he was a pastor and they had a phone number. It rang there. My sister had a different number. And so it was like 4 or 5 lines that all answered. And so every day, everybody would leave and they would put their phones, because back then you had like the cordless phones. They put their phones in the room with me and I would answer the calls. Well, I'm in the room and I guess politics had discovered these robocalls or whatever. And so T. Holloway was running for state representative and all of our numbers was on his list. And so we constantly get these calls about voting for T. Holloway. And so we were being phone banked. And so I realized that the office was really right down the street. We stayed on 23rd Avenue and 176th Street. His office was on 167th Street and 22nd Avenue. So I really could just walk there. And so, I've been getting these calls, and I realized that, hey, I'm getting these calls. Why won't they stop? And so I take a shower. I go up there one day, and I talk to a lady, Kim McCrae. She's his campaign manager. And I say, hey, listen, Kim, I want the calls to stop. And so what do I have to do to make these calls stop? And so Kim says, well, who are you? I'm Oliver Gilbert. And so she asked me to tell her about myself, and I talked to her about myself. And, I just graduated from law school, took the bar. I think I got my results at that point. I'd done really well in the bar, but I wasn't even looking for a job. And because I was kind of tired. I was tired. And so, it was cool. I said, listen, my family's huge in Miami Gardens. Like in this district, your legislative district, my family's everything. This is what I can do. I can get you these votes if you just take all of these numbers off the list. Just take us off the list. Because my only job is to answer the phones. That's my only job, is to answer the phones. And you are making my job difficult. She said she would. The call stopped. I got him the votes. The entire family voted for T. Holloway. I can't even remember who he was running against. It didn't matter. They were going to vote for him because I said they were going to vote for him, and I wanted those calls to stop. And so it was cool. And what happens is later on, she keeps my number and she calls me, and she says, hey, this is Kim. You came to our office. And so I was working with him, but I was also working with a principal who's going to be elected in District 109. Her name is Dorothy Bendross Mendengal. And she's running for state rep. She's going to win. She's going to need a legislative aid. Are you still sitting around doing nothing? And I said, I wouldn't describe it as that. I describe it as I'm assessing my options. And so would you agree to meet with her? And I met with her, and I met with my future boss, Dr. Dorothy Bendross Mendengal. And I remember we met for breakfast, and we talked so long that we end up having lunch also. That's how long the conversation was. And she told me she wanted to hire me on the spot, and I accepted the position on the spot. I didn't even know what it paid. Turns out it didn't pay a lot, but I was living at home, and it seemed like a really interesting job. I get to work in policy and law and go to Tallahassee and just understand how the government works. And so I had been to Tallahassee before, so I had some familiarity with it. I went to FAMU there. I'm fresh out of law school, so young lawyers, the only person who knows more than a lawyer who's been practicing for 20 years is someone who just passed the bar exam. They know everything. They are the smartest lawyers in the world that are brand new lawyers. They know everything because they just took the test, and I had just done well on the test. And I was like, well, obviously I thought I knew everything about everything. And so I took the job, and that's how I that's my first job, but that's how I started getting into public service. I become the first legislative aide for a brand new representative, Dorothy Bendross Mendengal. And so from there, the career is it's interesting. I get a call one day from Janet Reno. And Janet, who's, the former Attorney General of the United States of America, says, I'm running for governor, and they tell me that you're smart. I'd like you to write policy for me. And so I was like, wow, cool. Okay, I'll do it. I'll do it. And so I go and I work for Janet, and I write policy for her as her deputy policy director while she's running for governor. She doesn't win. And in assessing what I wanted to do, I always knew that I as far as litigating, I always knew that I wanted to be a prosecutor. And so I applied to Dade County and Broward County. And Broward County, Mike Satz, they call me up and they say, hey, you have an interesting background. We'd love for you to come up here and be a prosecutor. And I go on to be a prosecutor in Broward County. I go on from there into private sector. I become partner in a law firm. I work at first at Weiss Sirota. I go on to Lewis, Stroud & Deutsch. I become a partner there. And I transition to other firms, basically practicing litigating in civil rights, representing cities when they're being sued in federal court, writing briefs. And so that's how my practice evolves, and that's how my career evolves.
So when did you first become interested in running yourself for office?
I did not become interested in it at all. I didn't become interested in it. I tell the story of my actual public service, me running for office. I would never be in elected office if Miami Gardens had not become a city. If Miami Gardens does not become a city, I don't ever put my name on a ballot. Miami Gardens incorporates in 2003, and I run for city council, and I run and I lose. And I didn't know anything about campaigns. I knew very little about politics. I thought I did because I worked for a state representative, but I just knew about policy. I did not know about politics, and I did not necessarily understand the difference. And so I run and I lose. I remember I ran against someone who became a very good friend, Oscar Brannon. And Oscar raised $120,000 for a city council seat, which was amazing to me because I raised like $19,000. And I got 46% of the vote with $19,000. And I joke with him all the time, hey, listen, if I had raised like $25,000, I think I could have beat you. So because he raised 120 and just got 50% and some change. And so it was interesting, but that's what happens. I run, but I stay active. I wasn't, it's funny now in politics. You run against somebody and you run against them, and because you ran against them, they're your enemy. And I always like to make the difference or draw the difference between your opponent and your enemy. I don't have necessarily enemies, and I didn't make Oscar my enemy. He was my opponent. And so when I lost, I called him that night. I remember my dad was there, my cousin Melvin was there, and I said, hey, listen, if there's anything I can do to help, let me know. And I meant it. And I stayed very active in Miami Gardens. I would go to every city council meeting and sit in the front row and just listen. Not listen for the purposes of criticizing, listen for the purpose of assisting them. I would still work with the mayor, Shirley Gibson. I would still work with Oscar Brannon. I would work with everyone who was on the city council. And so I would do that because I genuinely wanted to see the city of Miami Gardens do well. And so I stayed very active in the city of Miami Gardens. He goes on. It's funny how everything is like full circle. The seat that T. Holloway had in the state house becomes empty because T. Holloway gets appointed to the school board by the governor for an empty seat. And Oscar, who's on the city council, runs for that state representative seat. And he wins. When he wins, he writes a letter to Shirley saying, hey, I think you should appoint Oliver to my seat, recommending me. She appoints me to the seat. I become a city councilman in Miami Gardens in 2008. I run to retain the seat. I think it's later that year. Then I run for a full term in 2010, and I win. I wasn't necessarily thinking about running for mayor because I was a brand new city councilman. But when I saw the other folks who were running for mayor, it's like 6 of them, and I listened to the ideas, and I was like, that's all crazy. If they can be mayor of Miami Gardens, I clearly can be mayor of Miami Gardens, which, in context, Miami Gardens is the third largest city in Miami-Dade County, the largest predominantly African-American city in the state of Florida. It's a big deal. And so when I look back on it now, I didn't necessarily have the political experience to run for mayor of Miami Gardens. That didn't stop me from running. And I remember because I wasn't the favorite. I wasn't the person that people necessarily wanted to win it. I wasn't the person that people necessarily thought was going to win. And so I ran against 6 people, and I got over 60% of the vote without a runoff. And so I beat the field by a lot. It wasn't, in fact, close. And so with that, I become the second mayor of Miami Gardens. And I start, working on what I would call transforming my hometown, understanding who we were, but also having a good idea from listening to the residents, understanding who we could become as a city. And those are the moments that I look back on now.
So I'll tell you this. One of your best known attributes is that you're intelligent. People say you're smart all the time. My question to you is, at what point did you notice it? And at what point did you begin to embrace it? Because some of us can have that intelligence but are afraid to embrace it or don't even realize their capabilities.
No, my mom raised me to be smart, and so my dad raised me to be caring. My dad, people talk about my intelligence. I'm not smart compared to either of my parents, and their intelligence was in very different ways. They had very different, types of intelligence. My mom was just brilliant, making nothing. She only made A's, and she had all these postgraduate degrees. She only made A's. My dad, he graduated from high school, Miami Northwestern Senior High School. He didn't really take any college classes, but he was brilliant. His brilliance was biblical. It was faith. And so he knew everything about the Bible. He understood it. He could quote Bible verses and memory verses from memory. And so there are different types of intelligence. So when I look back now, I reflect on the question that you asked. When did I realize I was intelligent? I don't know, because I look at intelligence differently. I look at it as though, there's this type of intelligence, the intelligence that I have, the ability to iterate, the ability to listen to what your problem is and what your situation is and empathize with you and figure out how to actually address that based on information that I've acquired in the past. I think that's what people hear, and they think about it as intelligence. But really, it's just the speed at which I'm doing it and what I'm doing. I'm taking what you're saying, what you're presenting to me. I'm overlaying information. I'm iterating, and I'm coming out with a response pretty quickly. And I think that if I had to point to a time in my life when I said, hey, I'm pretty smart, when I really realized I was smart, probably when I was at FAMU with a lot of smart people. And with a lot of smart people, I was still pretty smart. And then in law school, where the expectations were so incredibly low, which I didn't understand, of black law students. And so I realized that in a class that was completely diverse, with no one giving me a break, I was still as good or better than everyone who was sitting next to me. So if intelligence was something that you get because you're comparing it to other things, I realized in those moments that I had the ability to actually have conversations and hold my own with anyone. And so it becomes, what's that it's the poem that's written, I guess, Maryland something, but it was recited, it was made famous by Nelson Mandela. Our deepest fear is not that we're inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we're powerful beyond measures. Our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. You ask yourself, who are you to be, talented, fabulous, brilliant? Who are you not to be? You're a child of God. And so I think back on those words often, because a lot of people are afraid of saying they're smart. And you shouldn't be. You should never be afraid of talking about how extraordinary you are. You should never be. And so I don't talk about it often, but I'm not afraid to say it. And I'm not afraid to prove it.
All right, we're going to go a little bit quicker because we're getting close on time. So
that's because you're taking a lot of time, Theresa.
Choose your strongest 2 leadership attributes.
Strongest 2. I surround myself with really smart people generally. So picking a good team, people who are capable, I want smart people around me. I actually want people who are smarter in some respects, who are more informed in some respects than I am, because I don't want to have to know everything. So in Miami Gardens, that manifests with me actually picking people who can do policing, who are really good at operations, and picking people who could really do administrative stuff, and people who could really organize events, and people who could really understand economics developments. I knew what the goals were, but I knew that I needed people around me. I needed to pick a good team. And me picking a good team, I think, was important. And then understanding that I was going to set the vision. This is where we are going. This is where it ends up. This is how the story ends. I walk in the room and I say, this is how the conversation ends. This is the end of our story. This is how Miami Gardens is going to look. We're going to have businesses in this respect. We're going to be safe in this respect. We're going to have activities in this respect. This is how it ends. You all tell me how we get there. Picking the team and setting the vision. If I had to say what my strongest, leadership attributes were, it's my ability to do those two things. I can pick a team and I can set a vision.
All right, choose your leadership attribute you'd like to have more of.
Patience. I'm not a patient person. And I think that's a positive, but sometimes it's a negative. I'm not impatient. And I had a speech one time. I said, pardon my impatience. Because people have been asked to wait. I've been asked to wait. People have been asked to wait. And so it's difficult because systemic change takes time. And so I am not particularly patient, so that becomes particularly problematic sometimes. And so if not just for me, but for the public. And so what I've started doing was trying to expectation set better. Like set the expectation that it's not going to be quick, because it's like that if you want some really good food, right? But not just food that tastes good, but food that's good for you. It's not something you get from McDonald's. It's not fast food. It's something that it's cooked to order. It's a recipe. You need a little bit of the salt, and you need some onions, and you need to add those ingredients. Those ingredients need time to actually come together and mix up, and the product is what it's not just something that tastes good. It's something that actually is good for you, and so we need time to fix things. But you need to be patient, and you need to preach patience in a way that people can accept.
Quick personal round. Favorite color, orange or green?
Orange.
You wear different socks all the time. Can you tell us why?
Different socks all the time. So first, I am not going to be a person who actually matches socks, because it just takes too much. I have a whole bunch of socks. I'm not going to match socks. And so, I'd ask the question all the time about matching socks. Why do socks have to match? And what do socks do? What do socks do? Socks, they're meant to keep your feet warm. They mean to stop your shoes from getting all smelly. Why do they have to look the same? Why do they even have to match your clothes? Matching socks are a social construct. I reject that. Someone said that socks need to match because they decided. Somebody in France a long time ago said this was a color palette and socks had to match. I don't care what they said. I will wear the socks I want to. They will look the same or they won't. Lately, I've been wearing no-shows because it goes with my outfits. I'm going to do what I think looks good for me. If you like it, you like it. If you don't, I can pretend to care.
You're known for bow ties. You're not wearing one today, but when did you decide that bow ties were kind of your style?
It definitely, I don't know that I did decide. My Pastor Arthur Jackson III decided for me, and then a woman complimented me. Let me tell you what happened. So we go, and he has his pastoral anniversary, and I forget which one it was. And I wasn't making a lot of money at the time. I still don't make a lot of money. And he said, well, what I want from every man in the church is to wear a bow tie. And I did not have a bow tie. And so Pastor Jackson, who was one of my friends, Artie, one of my best friends, he gives me a bow tie. And I learned to tie a bow tie, and I tie the bow tie. And I wasn't very good at that time at tying the bow tie. But what happens is I tie the bow tie. It doesn't look very good. But I remember walking in church, and this lady said, "Oh, you look nice." That did it for me. That did it for me. She was attractive too. That did it for me. I was like, well, you know what? Hey, listen, you like this? really? Because I've been into these a little bit. And then, so that was how it started with the bow ties. It was interesting because, then I would buy bow ties, but then I realized I didn't like the bow ties that were being made. So I said, that I was buying, and they were expensive. So I started buying a quarter of a yard of fabric and just having someone make bow ties. And so now I have about 1,000 bow ties. And ironically, since I'm wearing neckties now, I'm having neckties made. I got about, right now I have, this is going to be sick because you all know when I started doing this, I have 100 neckties that are custom made.
So you started the series. We're talking about reimagining Miami Gardens. And as we go through it, what do you wish for listeners to take away from your series?
I think it's the socks, right? It's the socks. It's the socks.
It's not the socks.
No, it is. And it's the socks, and it's the lesson that we get from socks. It's from matching socks. And you think you know how something has to look. But what you need to think about is what you really want it to do. What do you, and so divorce yourself from the expectation of the construct. Socks are meant to keep your feet warm. They don't have to match. They don't have to match each other. They don't have to match your shirt. They don't have to match your tie. They just need to keep your feet warm and stop your shoes from becoming smelly. That's the function of the socks. And so if I were taking that and I were applying that to cities, find out what you want it to do. When people talked about crime, you want the reduction of crime. People believe they know how reducing crime looks. Figure out what works for you. People talk about economic development. You know what you want it to do. Figuring out how to do it is going to be something that's specific to you. Divorce yourself from the construct. The power of the construct is our collective belief in the construct. If you divorce yourself from that, what you'll find is you can get the results without, it just might not look the same as everybody else has done it. And I think that's what we've done in Miami Gardens, and I think that's what's doable in cities across America and across the world.
Thank you for listening to Reimagining Miami Gardens. Join us for our next episode as we dive into the leadership principles that guided the transformation of Miami Gardens into the vibrant city it is today. Until then,